My name is Emily. I'm 34 years old. And here's what my sister didn't know when she banned me from her wedding. I still had the folder. Legal paperwork, photographs, a handwritten card in her own hand, from the day she thanked me for saving her life and her daughter's, both at once. She thought that folder was ancient history, something buried so deep in the past that no one would ever think to open it again. She was about to marry into a family obsessed with appearances. A family who believed she'd built her whole steady, stable life entirely on her own. And 3 days before the wedding, she sent me a text message that said, and I'm quoting this exactly, "Don't come. You're not welcome anymore." 11 words, no explanation. As if 4 years and 2 of the hardest years of my life could be deleted with a single text. I didn't cry when I read it. I didn't scream. I sat completely still, and I thought about one very specific moment from that folder, a photograph from a courthouse hallway that smelled like burnt coffee, the day I handed my sister back her own daughter. And I thought, she has no idea what she just started. By the end of her wedding day, one person in that room was going to know the entire truth. And it wasn't going to be me who told them the loud way. It was going to be something much quieter and much harder for anyone to ever take back. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand exactly what those 2 years actually cost me, before you understand exactly what it meant when she tried to erase them. My sister Rachel and I were never close growing up. 6 years apart, opposite personalities, I was the responsible one, she was the one who could talk her way out of anything. Our relationship for almost 30 years was warm but distant. Holidays, birthdays, nothing more. Then, 4 years ago, I got a phone call at 11 at night that changed both our lives permanently. Rachel was sobbing, barely coherent. A social worker had come to her apartment that afternoon. Her relationship with Lily's father had collapsed violently. She'd lost her job. And somewhere in the wreckage of both, she'd started drinking, badly enough that a neighbor had called it in after Lily, 6 years old at the time, had been left alone for several hours. I want you to understand something before I go further. This wasn't a story about a bad mother. It was a story about a good mother in genuine crisis, terrified she was about to lose the one thing she couldn't survive losing. I didn't think twice. I told her I'd step in. Within 2 weeks, I was Lily's legal guardian. I still remember the first night Lily stayed with me. 6 years old, sitting on the edge of a guest bed, clutching a backpack she wouldn't unpack, watching me with eyes that already knew adults' promises didn't always hold. I sat across from her on the floor and asked if she wanted to help me pick paint colors that weekend. It took her almost a full minute to answer. When she finally nodded, it felt like the most important agreement I'd ever made with anyone in my life. What followed were 2 years I never planned for and never regretted. I moved apartments to be near her school. I learned her peanut allergy, the exact angle her nightlight needed, the precise way her stuffed rabbit had to be tucked in or she'd wake up at 2 and insisting something was wrong with the world. I sat through parent-teacher conferences explaining, every single time, that yes, I was her legal guardian, not her mother, watching teachers do the same small double take, every single time. There was a court hearing about 4 months in, a standard review, though Rachel was terrified it meant she'd failed. I remember sitting beside her in hard plastic chairs, her nails digging small marks into my hand from gripping it so tightly. A tired judge who'd clearly seen 1,000 cases like ours looked directly at me and asked why I'd agreed to take legal responsibility for a 6-year-old with no warning and no preparation. I told her the truth, because nobody else was going to, and Lily didn't have time to wait for someone else to decide to. Rachel did the work on her end, genuinely, fully. Outpatient program, no missed sessions, a steady job at a dental office, supervised visits that became unsupervised as she rebuilt trust brick by brick. But recovery isn't a straight line, and there was one night about 8 months in that I've never told anyone the full details of. Rachel called me at nearly 1 a.m., her voice slurred in a way I recognized instantly and dreaded. She'd had a setback, one bad night after a rough shift at work, one drink that became several. She wasn't asking me to cover for her. She was terrified, crying, certain this single night would undo everything, certain the caseworker would find out and take away her last chance at getting Lily back for good. I remember standing in my kitchen at 1 in the morning, Lily asleep down the hall, deciding in real time what kind of guardian and what kind of sister I actually wanted to be. I told Rachel the truth. That one bad night didn't erase 8 months of real, hard-won progress, but that hiding it would. I told her to call her sponsor first thing in the morning and be honest with her caseworker about the setback, because the system was built to support people who stumbled and told the truth about it, not people who hid it and got caught. She was terrified. She did it anyway. It became, months later, one of the things her caseworker cited as proof Rachel had genuinely internalized accountability, not just performed it. I tell you this because it matters for what came later. Because the sister who trusted me enough to call me, crying, at 1 a.m. during her lowest moment, was the same sister who would one day let a room full of near strangers believe that lowest moment had actually belonged to me. It took the better part of 2 years, but eventually, the caseworker recommended reunification. I handed guardianship back to her in a courthouse hallway that smelled like burnt coffee. She hugged me so hard I could barely breathe and said, "I don't know how to ever thank you for this." A week later, she gave me a card. I still have it. In her looping handwriting, "You saved us both. I'll never forget what you did for Lily and me. Love you always." I believed her completely. I had absolutely no idea that 4 years later, those exact words, "You saved us both," would become the piece of evidence I'd need to prove I even existed in this story at all. About a year after Rachel got Lily back, she met David. David came from money, not obscene wealth, but the comfortable, image-conscious kind that shapes an entire family's instincts. Private school upbringing, a father who owned a chain of dental practices, and a mother, Carol, who I would come to understand had very specific, very unspoken opinions about what kind of family was acceptable to marry into. I liked David, genuinely. Kind, a little reserved, wonderful with Lily, who adored him almost instantly. I was happy for Rachel. I want to be completely clear about that, because everything that happened afterward had nothing to do with jealousy. It had to do with something I noticed slowly, so slowly I almost missed it entirely. Rachel stopped mentioning the 2 years. Not all at once. It faded the way a photograph fades in sunlight. You don't notice the color draining until, one day, it's simply gone. At a family barbecue, I overheard her describing it to one of David's cousins as a rough patch a few years back when she and Lily needed a little space, stayed with family, sorted things out. Technically true. But it shrank 2 years of legal guardianship, therapy, and a formal custody transfer down into something that sounded like an extended weekend visit. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. People simplify hard chapters for new partners' families all the time. I didn't need credit. I genuinely didn't. Around that same time, I started noticing something else, something smaller and harder to point to directly. At gatherings, whenever conversation drifted anywhere near, "How did you two manage during that period?" Rachel would find a reason to refill a drink, check on Lily, step away to take a phone call that never seemed to actually be ringing. She'd gotten good at it, a kind of practice deflection that looked, to anyone who didn't know to look closely, like ordinary social smoothness. I only recognized it because I'd spent 2 years learning to read every flicker of anxiety on her face during the hardest stretch of her life. Old habits, apparently, cut both ways. But there was one dinner, maybe 2 years into their relationship, before the engagement, that I still think about. David had picked the restaurant himself. Family-friendly but nice enough for grown-ups, he'd said. Carol was there. Rachel was visibly nervous in a way I hadn't seen from her in years, laughing slightly too fast at things that weren't especially funny, her fork tapping an anxious little rhythm against the edge of her plate that she probably didn't even notice she was doing. Lily, 8 at the time, asked loudly across the table if she could tell the guardian story. Rachel's face went pale for exactly half a second before she laughed it off. "Oh, sweetie, grown-ups are talking," and steered the conversation elsewhere so smoothly I almost missed how deliberate it was. Almost. I filed it away. I didn't understand yet what I was filing it under. I just knew, somewhere quiet in my chest, that something had shifted, and it wasn't shifting in a direction I liked. The moment everything changed happened at Thanksgiving, almost 2 years into Rachel and David's relationship. David's father asked me, casually, the way people ask questions over turkey and mashed potatoes. "So Rachel mentioned you two had a tough stretch a while back, everything good now?" I said yes. Everything was fine. I assumed he meant Rachel's situation with Lily's father, the breakup, the instability, all of it years behind us now. I was wrong about what he was actually asking. I just didn't know it yet. Weeks later, my mother called me, confused and clearly a little hurt on my behalf. She said Carol, delicately, in the careful way wealthy, image-conscious people ask delicate questions, had asked her whether I had had some struggles a while back, with stability, maybe some substance issues, and whether that was all resolved now. I sat on my kitchen floor, with the phone against my ear, for a full minute before I could even respond. Rachel hadn't just softened her own story, she had redirected it, quietly, carefully. In whatever version she'd been telling David's family, the crisis, the instability, the thing that had needed fixing 4 years earlier, wasn't hers. It was mine. I called her that night. Not screaming, I remember being strangely, almost clinically calm, the way you feel watching something break in slow motion with nothing left to do but observe it clearly. It's not, I didn't say it like that exactly, she said, when I asked directly. I just didn't want to get into the custody stuff. It's complicated. Carol asks a lot of questions, and it came out easier to just say it was more about you helping me through something. Not the specifics. Does Carol currently believe I'm the one who needed help 4 years ago, instead of you? A pause, then quietly. I mean, maybe a little, it's not that deep. It's not that deep. 4 words that told me everything about how she'd weighed this decision, my reputation, quietly sacrificed as the smallest, easiest inconvenience in exchange for a smoother relationship with her future in-laws. She promised she'd fix it, she'd find the right moment. When? I asked her. Before the wedding? At Christmas? When Lily's older? Rachel, there isn't going to be a magically comfortable moment to tell people the truth. There's just the choice to do it, or the choice to keep letting me be the version of this story you're ashamed of. That's not fair, she said, and I could hear something crack slightly in her voice, not quite guilt, not quite defensiveness, some uncomfortable place in between. You don't know what it's like with Carol. She has opinions about everything. She already thinks I married too fast, that I have baggage because of Lily's dad. If she thinks I was also the one who needed rescuing from myself a few years ago, I don't know what that does to how David's family treats me, treats Lily. I understood in that moment what I was actually up against. This wasn't simple laziness or forgetfulness. Rachel had made a calculated bet that protecting her own image with Carol mattered more than protecting mine, and that I would forgive the cost of that bet quietly, the way I'd forgiven so much else over the years without ever asking for anything back. That moment never came. I brought it up twice more over the following months, gently, and both times she deflected. Things are so busy right now, I don't want to make it weird before the wedding. Can we just get through this first, and I'll sort it out after? I started to understand something I didn't want to understand. Sorting it out was never actually going to happen. My reputation wasn't worth even one slightly uncomfortable conversation with Carol. Quick question for you, before I keep going. If your sibling let their future in-laws believe your struggles were actually theirs, just to avoid an awkward conversation, would you have let it go? Or said something right then? Drop your honest answer in the comments, because it's about to get a lot more complicated. Here's the part I didn't expect. The part that turned this from a hurt feeling into something I couldn't just let go of. About a month before the wedding, Lily called me on a Sunday afternoon, the way she did most weekends. Somewhere in the middle of describing a school project, she mentioned, completely offhand, the way 10-year-olds mention things without realizing their weight, that her mom had told her not to bring up the guardian stuff around Grandma Carol anymore, because it makes things complicated. Then she asked me directly, "Why is it complicated? You helped us. That's not a secret, is it?" I told her gently that it wasn't a secret, not from her, not ever. But after I hung up, something settled cold in my chest that hadn't been there before. This wasn't Rachel failing to correct a misunderstanding anymore. This was Rachel actively managing what her own 10-year-old daughter was allowed to say, coaching a child to help maintain a story that quietly erased the person who'd once sat with her through every thunderstorm until she could breathe normally again. I decided, right then, that I wasn't going to push anymore. I was going to wait. Watch. See exactly how far Rachel would let this go before she'd finally choose truth over comfort. I did call her once more, about 2 weeks before the wedding, not to push exactly, but because I needed to say one thing out loud before I let this go entirely. I told her what Lily had said. I told her that whatever she decided to do about Carol, about David's family, about her own image, that was her choice to make, and I'd stop trying to control it. But I needed her to understand that involving Lily in it, asking a 10-year-old to help manage an adult's carefully curated story, was a different thing entirely. That wasn't protecting an image anymore. That was teaching a child that the truth is something you hide when it's inconvenient. Rachel went quiet on the phone for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight, defensive in a way I hadn't heard from her since the worst of the crisis years earlier. I didn't ask her to lie, I just asked her not to bring it up. There's a difference. I told her I didn't think Lily could tell the difference. Not yet, maybe not for years. She didn't have an answer for that. The call ended a few minutes later, unresolved, both of us a little colder than when it started. I found out exactly how unresolved it really was 3 days before the wedding. If you've gotten this far, tell me where you stand right now. Is Rachel just protecting herself, or has this crossed into something worse by pulling Lily into it? Comment protecting herself or gone too far below. I genuinely want to know before you hear what happened next. My phone buzzed on a Tuesday evening. Don't come, you're not welcome anymore. I called immediately. She picked up on the second ring, her voice brittle, rehearsed, like she'd practiced this exact conversation in a mirror beforehand. Carol had concerns, she said, about the energy I might bring, given everything going on. When I pushed her to be specific about what everything going on meant, she admitted it flatly, almost bored, like she was tired of maintaining the pretense. Carol still believed I was the one with the history, and Carol had said, point blank, she didn't want anyone at the wedding who might bring instability into photographs that would be looked at for the rest of their lives. Did you correct her? I asked. Even now, even faced with actually banning your own sister from your wedding. Rachel's answer was the quietest, most devastating thing she said in that entire call. It's just easier this way. Please don't make this into a whole thing. I hung up. I didn't cry, though I expected to. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, phone still warm in my hand, in a strange, still kind of clarity that felt almost peaceful compared to the anger I'd braced for. I thought about showing up anyway, standing at the back of the venue in my nicest dress, forcing Rachel to actually turn me away in front of witnesses. I discarded that idea almost as fast as it arrived. A scene at the venue would only prove Carol's fear right. It would hand her the exact instability story she'd already decided to believe about me, gift-wrapped, in front of every guest she'd ever wanted to impress. I needed something quieter, something that couldn't be dismissed as making a scene, something that simply existed as undeniable fact, regardless of how anyone felt about it in the moment it landed. I got up, walked to my filing cabinet, and pulled out a folder I hadn't opened in almost 2 years. Before I tell you what was in that folder and what I decided to do with it, be honest with me in the comments. If you'd just been banned from your own sister's wedding after everything you'd done for her, what would you have done? Would you have shown up anyway, stayed silent, or gone looking for proof the way I did? I'll read every answer. Inside, the original custody paperwork with my name on it as legal guardian. The caseworker's closing report, praising the stable, structured home environment I had provided. Photographs, Lily's school events, the 7th birthday party I'd thrown in my cramped apartment, a construction paper, Mother's Day, card she'd made me at school that year, because for that stretch of her childhood, I was the closest thing to a mother she had steady access to. And on top the card, Rachel's own handwriting, "You saved us both." I want to be honest about the decision I made next, because it surprised even me. I wasn't going to send this to Rachel. I wasn't going to post it anywhere, wasn't going to confront Carol directly, wasn't going to do anything that could be spun into instability or drama. I was going to send it to exactly one person. The one person standing in that room the next day who actually deserved to know the complete truth about the woman he was about to promise his entire life to. David. The morning of the wedding, I didn't drive to the venue. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee going cold beside me, and I wrote him a message I'd been rehearsing in my head for 3 sleepless nights. I told him I wasn't coming, and that I understood if that felt complicated on his wedding day. I told him this wasn't about causing trouble or ruining anything or getting revenge. I told him only that before he said his vows, he deserved to know the complete truth about the sister standing beside him today, and about the 2 years that quietly made this entire day, this entire stable, happy family he was marrying into, possible in the first place. I attached one photo, not the legal paperwork, not the caseworker's report, just the card. Rachel's own words in her own handwriting, dated 4 years earlier. "You saved us both." I sent it, then I turned my phone face down and didn't check it again. That day was, strangely, one of the longest of my life, despite spending most of it doing absolutely nothing. I cleaned my apartment top to bottom, the kind of aimless cleaning people do when their hands need somewhere to go so their mind can go quiet. I made lunch I barely tasted. Around 3 in the afternoon, when I knew the ceremony would likely be happening, I sat on my back porch and let myself imagine it. Rachel in her dress, David waiting at the altar, Lily probably thrilled in some flower girl role. 100 guests with absolutely no idea what message might be sitting, read or unread, in the groom's jacket pocket. I thought more than once about calling the whole thing off, texting David, saying, "Ignore that, forget I sent it, have a beautiful day." My thumb actually hovered over his name in my contacts around 4 o'clock. But every time I got close, I thought about that courthouse hallway, the burnt coffee smell, the 2 years, the card in my own 2 hands with Rachel's own handwriting on it, evidence of a truth that existed whether or not it was convenient for anyone to acknowledge. I put my phone down and let the moment stand. I genuinely didn't know what would happen. I didn't know if David would show Rachel, ignore it entirely, file it away and never mention it. I had made my choice knowing I couldn't control anything that came after it, and for the first time in weeks, that uncertainty felt like enough. It felt like peace, not chaos. 2 days later, my phone rang. Rachel. Her voice wasn't angry, not at first. It was smaller than I'd ever heard it, almost childlike. "Why would you do that to me, on my wedding day of all days?" I told her the truth, as gently and as plainly as I could manage. I hadn't done anything to her. I had simply stopped letting her erase me to make her own life more comfortable. David deserved to know who had actually helped hold their family together through its hardest years, and the fact that truth felt dangerous enough to ban a sister over was never something I had created. I had only stopped participating in the silence that protected it. There was a long pause. Then, quietly, she said something I hadn't expected at all. "David talked to me. He wasn't upset the way I thought he'd be. He was upset that I never told him the real story. He said his own family has things they don't talk about too. Apparently, Carol had her own complicated past that gets smoothed over at every dinner table, conveniently. He said he wished I'd trusted him enough to just tell him the truth from the start. We're speaking again now, carefully, the way you rebuild something that cracked but didn't fully shatter." Rachel apologized, not perfectly, not all at once, but genuinely, over several conversations in the weeks that followed. She told Carol the real story eventually, on her own terms, without me forcing the moment. About 2 months after the wedding, Rachel invited me to Sunday dinner at their new house, the first invitation since everything happened. I almost said no. Part of me wanted to protect the careful distance I'd built. I went anyway, mostly for Lily, who'd been asking when I'd finally see her new room. Halfway through the meal, David set down his fork and said, without much preamble, "I want to say thank you for the message you sent me. I know it probably wasn't easy to send." Rachel didn't say anything out loud. She just reached over and squeezed my hand under the table, once, and somehow, that was more honest than any apology she could have spoken. Carol wasn't there that evening. I don't know if she ever will be, not in any warm way, and I've made peace with that. I didn't send that message to win Carol over. I sent it so the truth had somewhere solid to stand, with or without her approval. My relationship with Lily, now 10, was never in question through any of this. I still see her every other weekend. She still calls me for help with her science homework. She started asking more questions lately about the guardian years, piecing together, slowly, a story that shaped her far more than she consciously remembers. I answer her honestly. I always will. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. Quietly holding someone up during their hardest years doesn't obligate you to quietly disappear from the story once things get easier for them. You're allowed to matter in the parts of someone's life they'd rather not show off. And if someone tries to erase you to make their own image more comfortable, you're allowed to simply stop letting them. You don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes the quietest truth, placed in exactly the right hands, is louder than anything you could have shouted at the door. Last question, and this is the one I really want your honest opinion on. Was going to David instead of confronting Rachel directly the right call, or was that crossing a line too? There's no wrong answer. I just want to know what you'd have done in my shoes. Tell me in the comments, and if this story hit home for you, hit subscribe. I share a new one just like it every day.